Okay, so I'm here with TJ Woodward. My name is Jeremy Miller, and we are here to talk about the coronavirus, everything going on right now, and how we can remain connected and conscious during these very interesting times. So I think to start, TJ, did you want to do a meditation for us?
I would love that. Yeah, let's just take a few moments so we can anchor. And also, of course, hopefully the feed works where you can ask us questions or make comments. So I invite you in this moment, if it's appropriate for you, to gently close your eyes. And we begin by taking a nice, deep, conscious breath together. And on the exhale, simply allowing yourself to become fully present. Simply allowing yourself to bring your full attention and intention to this very moment. Giving yourself permission to arrive fully. So we start by noticing how it feels to be in your environment, noticing any sounds you're hearing, checking in with the overall energy level surrounding you. And taking a few more moments here to shift back to the breath and notice the effect it has on you as you take deep inhales and slow exhales. And then shifting awareness inward, beginning to check in with ourselves, starting with checking in physically. So just noticing how it feels to be in your body, noticing if you're holding tension. And if so, can you give yourself permission to relax at this moment? Shifting awareness to thoughts. Just noticing the activity of your mind and playing with the idea that we have thoughts, but we are not our thoughts. And just noticing what that creates. Never has there been a time where it's more important to identify that we have thoughts, but we're not our thoughts. We can create a bit of space between those thoughts and simply question them. In other words, we don't need to quiet our mind. We can simply observe it. Dropping down into our heart space, becoming aware of the emotional inner landscape. Taking a few moments here to honor whatever is present. Giving yourself permission to lean into those emotions. Just for a few moments here, having compassion for whatever's present. And then finally, shifting awareness even more deeply inward, finding that place of inner stillness, inner calm. Allowing yourself to drop down into that inner spaciousness as we take about 15 seconds in the silence together. And then slowly beginning to bring our awareness back into this time and space and gently opening our eyes.
Thank you, TJ.
Thank you.
All right. So I thought that now I'm just want to name this. There are people watching. I know that, but I can't see the live feed. So if I'm lagging on responding to your comments, you guys be patient. I appreciate you. So TJ, I thought the first thing that we could talk about is really just the pandemic of fear. So you and I had recorded a podcast the other day that is on the main feed for Conscious Recovery. So if you haven't listened to that yet, go onto iTunes, type in Conscious Recovery Podcast. It's the newest episode. But it's really something I wanted to dive into a little bit further because as the situation develops, we want to be transparent. We're not doctors. We're not trying to discuss this from a medical perspective, but rather from a spiritual perspective. And I think a lot of people right now, myself included, are having a difficult time kind of balancing the fear and rationality, and kind of how serious do I need to be? What do I do with all this fear that I'm experiencing underneath it?
Yeah, to start, I just want to say how we experience the world is how we expect to experience the world. And what I mean by that is, if I'm a person that tends to look for what I'm afraid of in the world, something like this is going to bring all of that up. What we want to start with is saying, whatever you're feeling, it's totally and perfectly okay. Because I've noticed a whole lot of judgment on social media, what people should be doing, shouldn't be doing. There's even now, we're supposed to rate ourselves, how we're responding, 1, 2, 3, or 4. And then if you don't say you're a 3 or a 4, people are like putting all kinds of comments like, you need to do this, this, and this. So we want to start by saying, however you're feeling emotionally, we honor that. As a matter of fact, the key to working through what we call the pandemic of fear is to really get in touch with the emotion and have some compassion for what we're feeling. Because if I'm not allowing myself to feel, I'm going to then project outward, right? The administration should be doing this. Why is that country doing this? Why are those people out on the sidewalk, etc.? So to start with, what we want to say is, as Jeremy said, we're not medical doctors. You're all very, very lucky. I'm not a medical doctor. I would not be my forte. But what we really want to talk about today is the emotional and spiritual aspect of what's happening. And in that case, we could say the pandemic of fear, for many of us, not for all of us, our heart goes out to anyone directly affected by coronavirus. For many of us, the pandemic of fear is actually bigger than the pandemic of the coronavirus. And so fear creates all sorts of absurd behaviors and responses. I had to go pick something up, and yes, it was a necessity. And there was a woman in the store really actually screaming at people, I need you to stand 10 feet away from me. And she made everyone clear away, including all the employees at the front door, so that she could get out the door safely. So there's a lot of fear. It's really easy to pick up on the energy of fear. And when we get afraid collectively, all kinds of absurd things start to happen.
Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things that I think many people are struggling with, and I don't want to project experience onto others, but in my experience, it's really hard to find the healthy middle ground between being aware and alert, and being afraid, and succumbing to that fear, and allowing it to really take hold of us and our behaviors, our emotions, and our feelings and things. And so I know for me, one of the things that has really helped is one of the primary principles of conscious recovery, and that is just that whatever I'm experiencing right now, whatever I'm feeling right now, is perfectly okay. And I think that being able to allow these judgments to be present, allow these feelings to happen, is so paramount. Because, when you go on social media right now, it's like the two camps, right? It's the people that say, coronavirus isn't a big deal, like, I don't care, whatever. And then there's the other side of the conversation that's freaking out at those people for not taking it seriously. And so I think on both sides and anywhere in between, there are judgments. And I think it's so important to let people know that those judgments are okay. I think that it's important to acknowledge that they're judgments, so that we can, by acknowledging, hey, this feeling or this thought I'm having is a judgment, I can then analyze it and say, okay, is this judgment, is this based in reality? Because for me, my reaction when people aren't taking it seriously is to shame them and yell at them and freak out. And, but by acknowledging that that's a judgment, I can respond mindfully rather than react abrasively. And I think that's really important, because the more abrasive reactions people get, the more entrenched into their own ideals they'll become.
Yes, absolutely. And that's the key there, is to look at what judgment creates, right? Judgment creates restriction, judgment creates separation. And what we know right now is that going into this, let's look at American culture for a moment. In the United States, there was at least a perception that we were a country divided with politics and everything that was happening. I don't actually hold that to be true, but that's what a lot of what the media was telling us. And a lot of people were really buying into that paradigm of sort of an us and them and good and bad paradigm. So then when this comes along, right, it brings all of that up even more. So now we have another way to put ourselves into camps, right? And I mean, I have never seen so many posts in all caps with exclamation points. For those of you who are going hiking, please stop. And, you know, in California, the restrictions, the guidelines are saying it's okay to get out and hike. It's healthy. People need to get their exercise. So that's what we're talking about here. And again, we're not talking about what we consider to be facts because as we know, every single day is going to bring new information. But more than that, it's where you're getting your information and then what it's getting filtered through, right? Three of us can hear the same news and have three totally different interpretations about the fact and then therefore our response, right? So again, to question those judgments, as you said, question my thoughts, right? I have this thought, but I'm not my thought. And if it's true that I'm not my thoughts, because I can start to look at the ways it's either, is it bringing me closer together to people or further apart? And a big theme of our show today is connection, right? And a lot of us now don't have the ability to have physical connection with the people that we love, you know. And it was interesting. I had all kinds of dreams last night about people that I love and miss, and we were having this beautiful experience of connecting. And so one question is, how do we stay connected in the midst of this? And does judgment create more connection or more division? Obviously, the answer seems almost too obvious to delve into, but that's a question I invite people to sit with for themselves.
Yeah, and I agree 100%. And I think, you know, you touched on something that leads me into kind of our next topic, and that is the emotional and spiritual impact that fear and pandemonium can play in our lives. And so I know for me, what I've been sitting with is when I think about all the people out there that are alone and you know, I was on a podcast earlier today and we were talking about social media and news and all that stuff. And, you know, I was thinking about how my generation, we kind of grew up in this situation we're in where we're so saturated with information.
Right.
Right. But when I think about my parents, for example, you know, when they were growing up, they had the news on TV and that was it. You got news on the newspaper and the television, right? And you don't watch TV all day because you're at work, you're with family, you're all that. But now we're completely saturated. It's on our social media, it's in our email, it's in, you know, everybody's conversations in public. It's, you know, the news, it's all day with this information. And I think that is such a big part of the problem. It's very good that we're so able to stay aware of what's happening. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm just saying that the effects emotionally of all that input, I feel, has been really, really powerful. And so for me, you know, what I'm sitting with is a lot of sadness for the people that aren't alone, that can't discern between fake news, real news, all this information all day long, and they're living in this fear and apprehension. And how do we navigate that? How do we experience that? And what can we do to lessen the emotional and spiritual impact of it?
Yes, and that is a key, right? Like, what am I exposing myself to in terms of consciousness, right? So what we're not saying is don't get your information, but what we are saying is, if I spend, you know, 10 hours a day listening to the news and we're hearing over and over and over again the horror of this, and again, we're not here to debate whether it's happening or not, but we are able to say where we put our attention, what we feed grows, right? And so garbage in, garbage out. I remember before we had the order to stay inside in California, I was out of town, I was in Sacramento, and I turned on the news right at the beginning. And the newscaster said, we are gonna explore how the city of Sacramento is responding and fighting this deadly, deadly virus. And it's like, and I was interviewed on another show, and the person said, just so everyone's aware, not everyone's going to die from this, right? But so to say not everyone's going to die is an implication that almost everyone is, but we know that's not true. And again, I'm not trying to minimize, if someone's older, hasn't, immune system that's compromised. We all have a responsibility to do what we can to not spread it to these populations. But the pandemonium where people think they're going to get this and die, that's a whole other conversation, right? And then I have compassion for the woman at the store today that's yelling at people to stay 10 feet away because she's afraid, I'm guessing in her mind, that she might get this and die. Now, we could go down a rabbit hole in that, but I think for this moment, what I want to offer as a tool is really monitor where you're putting your focus, not to ignore or pretend it's not happening, but to recognize the psychological, emotional, and spiritual implications of spending so much time hearing this and seeing this over and over again. It reminds me of post 9/11 when they kept showing over and over and over again the plane crashing into the tower. So people were experiencing severe trauma when they weren't even in the situation. And again, that was a situation that was really painful for a lot of people, but the repetition of putting ourselves through it over and over and over again, the question, it's not, is that good or bad for you? The question really is, what is that creating? And what do you want to create in your life? And is there a different place you can put your focus rather than focusing on the news and this and social media that might really be looking at the horrific aspects of this only?
Yeah. And I think, when we talk about conscious recovery, we often speak to the power of perspective. And, this is kind of it's a delicate space because we don't want to demean or belittle what's happening. And I want everyone to know that their experience is their experience. And, I'm really trying to avoid being misinterpreted I don't want to seem like I'm speaking down to anybody's experiences.
Right.
What I know for myself is that in times that I'm overwhelmed with fear, in times that I'm overwhelmed with sadness, what I try to do is understand that while I'm, what I'm thinking of is I saw a woman this morning at the grocery store and she was elderly and she was by herself.
Yeah.
And I found myself wanting to help her with her groceries, but I had this conflict because I'm like, I can't get near her, but I want to help her, but I can't. And she probably knows that. And that's probably making her super sad. Right. And so all of a sudden I just projected this whole experience onto her. And what I have to remember is that might not be the experience that she's in.
Right.
And so what I've really tried to do with the precepts from conscious recovery, specifically the power of perspective, is creating a space where all these emotions can live, the fear and the anxiety and, the discomfort of not knowing what's going to happen. And also a space of knowing that me as an essential being, my essential self, who I truly am, is someone who cares, someone who wants to help and be of service. And that the need for that will never go away.
Yeah, you're speaking to like some really beautiful layers to this. One, as you said, is the power of perspective, recognizing that I do create meaning on what's happening 100% of the time. When I'm accountable for that, and again, when I'm not pretending like something's happened, I'm not going to pretend like it's not happening, but I can ask myself, what am I making this mean? What's the effect of this? What thought, emotion, or what's happening in my physical self that is creating the fear or creating, this ability to stay open? You're also talking about what I think is really fundamental here, and that is the fear of the unknown, or the inability for many of us to sit in the unknown.
Right.
The reality is life is unknown in the external realm, right? Things come and go, jobs come and go, relationships shift. This is just a powerful example of that. Many people try to create predictability in their life to feel safe. When something like this happens, we can get really shaken up because we're like, oh, we don't know what's going to happen. I'm seeing people post that we're probably going to be, locked in our homes for 18 months. That may be true, but no one knows that, right? So when that gets fed, then that grows, and then that hysteria grows, and then we start responding and reacting. The other thing that you're speaking to is really what we want to talk about today, and that is there's a place within ourselves that is the spiritual essence of who we are that cannot be harmed by this. Now, I know someone watching might say, well, what do you mean I could get coronavirus and get sick? But what we're talking about is the spiritual essence of ourself. And when I'm in contact with that, I'm able to allow the shifting, conditions of life to come and go. It doesn't mean I'm not going to have an emotion about it. But what it does mean is when I really know who and what I am fundamentally, then I can come from a very different place. I become curious. I become able to move with the flow of life. I don't think anyone having this experience, well, maybe there are a few, but most of us are not thrilled that this is happening, right? But what can we do? How can I make the most of this? How can I be of service, as you said? Yeah, I may not be able to, help someone with their groceries because I want to do social distancing, but there are things that we can do. That's why you and I are doing this show. We're doing this show to provide a forum for people to have some hope in the midst of this and to have some tools as well.
Yeah. And on that, that's a beautiful segue, because I think having tools is so paramount right now. I mean, I definitely want to talk about self-care and stuff as we move through this conversation, but I think maybe what we could look into right now is how can we use mindfulness and meditation as a tool during a time like this?
Yes. And before I even answer that, I do want to also speak to part of what people are afraid of right now isn't just the possibility that someone will get coronavirus. It's also, what if I don't have work?
Right.
What if if I'm a person living paycheck to paycheck, how do I get through this? Right. Someone posted today, just got laid off this morning. Company can't afford to keep us. Right. And this is a friend of mine in a different city. And so there are those looming questions for many of us as well. Obviously, I don't have the answer for that, except to recognize that mindfulness and meditation can be a tool to walk through that. I think a lot of us try to negotiate with that. Oh, everything's going to be okay. There's nothing to worry about. There's that internal dialogue. Through mindfulness and meditation, we're not trying to quiet the mind or even necessarily change the mind. We're really trying to tap into our essential beingness, spend time in the silence, recognize that the power of what is invisible in the spiritual realm is more powerful than what's happening in the world. And when I really understand that at a very deep level, I'm not as much in the fear of it all. I can move into a place of compassion and love for all the players, everyone who's doing the best they can in their response or reaction. And mindfulness is also an opportunity to notice my thoughts, to notice my feelings. With thoughts, it's, can I question them? I don't have to try to change them. We don't want to be aggressive with our thoughts, but start to question, wow, I wonder if that's the ultimate truth. What else might be possible? How else might I look at this? Who can I connect with today? You spoke to this, but being of service to others is one of the greatest tools for us to feel like we're on purpose now and that life has some meaning. I do trust, like in every situation, there's always something wonderful that comes from it. Always, right? And I think we talked about this in the podcast. I'm not saying that this happened for a reason, and the reason is so we can, but life happens and we have opportunities to open up or close off or create meaning. And one of the meanings that I'm creating for myself around this is, what are the possibilities for me to connect? Who in my life have maybe I not talked with in a while? Wow, I have time now. My calendar's surprisingly open compared to what it looked like 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, and that's a beautiful point. I think for me, I've had kind of a similar experience where I noticed that I wanted to assign meaning. I wanted to know the answer and know the outcome. And, you know, I've been in the same position where it's like, man, I mean, what if we're on the brink of economic collapse and everything changes? And, you know, and then I just have to like really drop down below my mind and into my heart and recognize that there's always more to life than, you know, the money and the job. And I'm not trying to belittle the importance of money and work, but when I think about my late mentor, Steve Brugge, and he used to tell me that real life is what happens after work. Right. And I always really resonated with that, because I think that right now the opportunity is to really tap into the fact that there is so much happening, like you said, in the spiritual realm. And when we're kind of in emotional and physical autopilot, going through our day, going through our thoughts and emotions the way we do every day, we kind of lose sight of what's happening underneath it all. And I feel like, you know, work and all these things that we're go, 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 it serves as a distraction from what we can find in the silence.
Yeah.
And so while this is a very painful experience for a lot of people, I think that there is also an opportunity to find some peace and some calm in the silence, in what we can't necessarily see, but we know is there.
Yeah. And you know, you and I love to talk about living in the questions. It's something right out of conscious recovery. It's something that my friend Adriana and I talk about a lot. She's the co-author of the Conscious Recovery Workbook. She and I are doing a show on Tuesday at noon together. Our topic is how to stay sane in the midst of insanity, right? Or an insane world. And when we look at just toilet paper as a metaphor, like what was the frenzy about that? And, you know, people fighting over packages of toilet paper, and now stores limiting, you can only buy one package, right? There's something more for us to see there. And so this idea of living in the question, a couple of questions that come to mind for me, and this is a question I use anytime something in the world or in my life is going a way that I have either a judgment about or some resistance to. I notice myself calling it horrible. So I ask myself, what is wanting to emerge here, right? What is wanting to emerge here? Another question that might help someone is, what is really important to me? Who might I connect with? What amazing and wonderful things might emerge as a result of this, right? So we can ask ourselves these questions. And the reason I'm spending some focus on that is that's a very, very tangible tool. You know, you might write down a few questions that are open-ended, don't start with why, that are empowering. And maybe you ask yourself the question and take 10 minutes in the silence, or maybe you write it on your mirror. I'm spending less time in the mirror now too, by the way. I mean, it's like I'm not getting ready for anything.
Oh man. Yeah, no, that's beautiful. And I think another topic I really wanted to get into that we touched on a little bit was creative connection, right? So one thing I've noticed, I mean, I'm a very social person, so but I also really value my personal time, my alone time, right? Where I'm just working and doing my own thing. And, I was on this Zoom call earlier, and it was a little networking event. And, as soon as I saw everybody sign in and there's little faces everywhere, I was like, oh, I miss you guys. Like, oh my God, this is so wonderful.
Yeah.
And it reminded me of something that's very important. And that is that while I may not be able to physically be in contact with somebody, I can still stay connected to them.
Yeah.
And so I think that's something that we've all kind of discovered in the last couple of weeks, is that the immediate threat of like, oh, you're quarantined, it's the shelter in place, you're not going to see anybody. It's a very lonely, very daunting thought. And I think that a powerful reframe for me is that, well, while I may not be able to experience them in person, which is what I prefer, I can still connect with them digitally. I can still call them, text them, FaceTime, Zoom. I mean, Zoom's like blowing up right now, So I think it's worth exploring how we can creatively maintain connection.
Yeah, and a couple of things I'll say. One, I just posted something. If anyone wants to see on my Facebook page, it's pretty hilarious. It's a person standing in a bathroom with mirrors on both walls with a wine glass, and it's saying how extroverts deal with the, whatever we call this, where we're quarantined or whatever.
Yeah.
And he's cheers to himself in all the different mirrors, right? So like, I've also seen a lot of, memes with introverts saying, wow, I've been waiting all my life for this directive.
Yep.
So it's all perspective. My friend Temple Hayes in Florida posted something that I thought was really powerful. She said, in the midst, and I'm going to totally paraphrase this, but in the midst of all of this, she's noticing that people are posting really loving things and really funny things.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like we have the ability as human beings to connect through humor and through compassion and through love. I think the Animal Planet is showing like 3 hours of nonstop puppy and kitten videos, right? And as funny or silly as that may sound, that's an example, right? Like we can connect in a creative way with each other. We can spend more time with our animals. At least in California, we're allowed to get out in nature if we keep our distance. And I think that if people are interpreting this as I must stay indoors, that can also have a profound impact on us psychologically and emotionally. So there are creative ways, as you said. I mean, if you're someone who's manufacturing toilet paper, you own a grocery store, or you have some kind of online platform, you're probably doing really well from a business standpoint. But let's, to really name what we're talking about in a more, I guess, authentic and transparent way, there are, I'm sure, plenty of people that feel disconnected and lonely. So there are opportunities to connect through these different platforms, but there's also the good old fashioned telephone. I know I don't, I'm not someone who has phone calls anymore. And so now it's like, oh, I can pick up the phone and call people. My husband and I FaceTimed with the family. It's like, it is an opportunity for us to look at what's important and how to be creative about ways we can stay connected.
Yeah. And I think too, one thing is, I kind of feel like, and it's been kind of a shared experience for, my girlfriend and my roommate, where, we're all, every night we kind of check in. How's everybody doing? What are you experiencing? And one thing I've really noticed is that I have the tendency to read a headline and then make that my reality. Right. So like you mentioned, it's like we've got the shelter in place. Right. And I always go to 100% sheltered in place. I'm staying in my studio. I can do everything I need to do right here. Right. And so this morning, just to do it, I went out and drove around for 20 minutes. Right. And I didn't come into contact with anybody. Obviously, I'm just sitting in my car, and I was driving around, and, I had been here, I'd been home for a few days. And as soon as I got out on the roads, I was like, oh my gosh, like, yes, this thing is happening. Yes, it's very sad. Yes, it's very scary. Also, things are a little more normal than the internet has caused me to believe them to be.
Correct.
Right.
Absolutely.
And so I think another important piece of creative connection is being able to connect with each other, check in, see how we're all doing, but also, connecting with nature and being outside our bodies and all these things. And, so for self-care, I know for me, like, a big part of my daily routine is going to the gym. And I go to the gym because I'm usually not good enough or disciplined enough to work out at home. Right. Because home is not where I work out. And so, I've been going on runs and working out outside and doing all these things. And that has helped me restore that connection with my normal life. Right. And so I think as we discuss creative connection, it's with each other, with ourselves, with our routines. And I think it's, and those things help, when I'm overwhelmed with all these emotions, and I sit inside and just stew in them like a crock pot of sadness, that's what I'm creating.
Yeah. And I wanted to shift gears slightly to what you're with what you're saying and speak to the recovery community.
For sure.
Because it's important for people in recovery from any kind of addiction or anyone really that has community where they feel really spiritually connected, whether they have an addiction or they're in recovery or not. How do we maintain those connections, right? And what we're seeing is a ton of online resources now. So like obviously a lot of 12-step meetings. I'm guessing there's probably some refuge meetings or Dharma, recovery meetings. There are opportunities for people to connect. Like we've created the Conscious Recovery Experience. Very, very interesting. We've been in the studio for a year creating content with wholehearted.org. We launched 3 days before this all happened.
Yep.
And so one of the things, AJ, who's a really wonderful man who owns Wholehearted, we had a wholehearted conversation about wow, this seems like kind of a weird time to say to people, it's $199 a year to get this recovery experience. And someone made a joke, well, grocery stores aren't giving the food away for free. Now, having said all of that, we're really aware that this brings up a lot for people, including some things financially. So he and I had a conversation heart to heart and just agreed that if, first of all, it's half price right now, $99, but also if someone is struggling with money or has a perception of struggling with money, he said, just have them email me and I'll work with them. So, that's, there are free resources on wholehearted.org. There's the Conscious Recovery Experience. I know the amazing Dr. Gabor Mate has some courses, and Wholehearted is really willing to meet people where they're at. So please don't let that be a deterrent, because we really, in the Conscious Recovery Experience, created material that will help you. And Jen Carvalho, the CEO of Azure Acres and the Camp, called me yesterday and said, if there's ever been a time that people could use conscious recovery, it's now.
Right.
She was asking me about how to reach more clients with conscious recovery. So our hope is that it will help during this time of really, because to me, the bottom line is it's a time of uncertainty. And in times of uncertainty, we need tools to help us stay connected with ourselves and each other.
Absolutely. And I think on that note, for the recovery community and for everybody, I mean, I think it's important to acknowledge the fact that just because we're quarantined doesn't mean that we're alone or that we have to be alone. And I think now more than ever is a perfect opportunity for personal growth and self-care. And, while the financial aspect and the employment aspect is definitely shaky right now, and it can be very daunting for a lot of people, I think that a very healthy way to manage those uncertainties is to create inside yourself. Yeah. And so, like you mentioned, the Conscious Recovery Experience, I mean, we couldn't have finished it in a more perfect time than now. And I think the value of it is really that if you're home all day, this is an online experience built for people who can be home working on it. And so, yeah, and I was really excited to get into conversation about meeting people where they're at financially and things like that, because it is very scary and people don't want to be spending money right now. And I also think that, there's a lot of free content on the internet too that's really helpful, like our podcast. And we had Jen Carvalho on the podcast. And I think just tuning into these resources is really helpful in managing all the emotional chaos that we could be in right now.
Yeah, I mean, I've talked to a lot of people that have said, I have 4 books on my nightstand that I've been meaning to read, and now they're like, oh, I have time to read these books.
Yep.
My thought was too, let me go back and read my favorite books, right? One of my favorite books is Eckhart Tolle's A New Earth. Let me spend some time with that, being in the energy of how we can use this as a time to really develop ourselves emotionally, mentally, spiritually, physically, through consciousness. It's really important right now. I mean, I put out a quote that was very simple, and that is, the greatest thing we can offer the world, or the greatest gift we can offer the world, is that of our own transformation. It's kind of a paraphrase of Lao Tzu, who said it 2,500 years ago, or 3,000, however long ago. We can take this time to go within, to really discover what's truly important, to make decisions from that rather than from the fear that might be happening in our minds or in the media. Spending time in the silence, I think right now, is going to be really, really important for us. asking ourselves, who in our lives might be afraid right now? Can I just listen? Right? Can I pick up the phone and call someone and not try to fix them or offer them any solutions? I mean, that's a huge part of our work, Jeremy, huge part of conscious recovery. We're not here to fix anyone because no one's broken.
That's right.
And so think of 3 people in your life that maybe they're older, maybe they live alone. Maybe there's someone that can get in fear around these types of things. See if you can dedicate yourself some time to really just listening and being present for them. I think there's a huge opportunity for us to have creative ways to maintain connection with ourselves and others. I'm going to use this as a time of deep introspection. What's really important to me? If we look at the metaphor of planting seeds, part of planting seeds is, sometimes we have to be mixed in with the shit. Shit happens. I like to say fertilizer happens, right? That seed has to stay under the ground for a while. And sometimes it's painful. Sometimes it's difficult. And it's always an opportunity for new growth, a new way of seeing, a new way of being, new connections, new opportunities.
Absolutely. And I think, and maybe some of this time, TJ, you could use to wrapping up that 3rd book you've been working on too.
It's interesting you say that, because I have it sitting here as a manuscript and it's on my list of things to do.
Perfect.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I was thinking maybe as we close up this conversation, one thing I want to make the audience aware of is that we did get a video and audio recording of you in the Wholehearted studio.
Yeah.
And for people who don't know what we're talking about, wholehearted.org, go check out that site. It's a place where people can come connect and learn more, improve more, get CEUs if you're in our field. There's, personal development courses with TJ, Gabor Mate. It's a beautiful platform. But you were in the studio and you did, I believe it's almost 20 minutes of just some words of encouragement and a meditation. And I want the audience to know that we're going to put that on the podcast tomorrow morning. Yeah. So that, if you're struggling through the weekend or whatever, and you need some support, then pull up your favorite podcast app, search Conscious Recovery. It's going to be the newest episode. And then in closing, TJ, I was wondering if you had any words of encouragement for people watching.
Yeah. And just to speak to that, I offered that meditation because I think more and more of us are recognizing the power of taking some time and slowing down and dropping into our heart space, dropping down into our beingness. I did it as a 4 rooms meditation, which I always do: physical, intellectual, emotional, spiritual. If you're having trouble remembering that, it's pies: physical, intellectual, emotional, spiritual. This is a time we can check in all those different areas. And so that meditation was really just an intention. It's a 10-minute meditation with me talking for a few minutes beforehand about how we do check in with ourselves during uncertain and possibly difficult times. What I want to say in closing is that if no one's told you today you're a whole and perfect spiritual being, and that you can honor all aspects of yourself, honor what's happening physically, honoring your thoughts, honoring your emotions, and tapping into your spiritual essence, what happens when we allow ourselves to simply be where we're at with this? If you are a person who likes to post, this is a very 21st century way of saying it, but a very in the moment quick meditation practice is pause before posting. What is my intention here? What's really happening here? And what am I trying to achieve by this? What am I hoping to get? What am I really desiring? This is what I want to offer as a tool in closing. It's this new sort of 4-step process I've been working with. It's in the 3rd book, so it's a little teaser, but it's starting to look at all of our strategies. So if my strategy is to be angry on social media, if my strategy is to isolate and not talk to anybody, if my strategy is to have a lot of anxiety, again, that's probably not a conscious one. I don't think anyone wakes up saying, I hope today's one of those really anxious days. Let's start with, I'm going to give you this formula. It's 4 steps. Step 1, we're looking at it as a strategy, right? Step 1 is gratitude. Thank you anxiety. I know you're trying to help me. Thank you, anger. I know you have served me well over the years. Thank you, depression. And this is so counter, right? Because so many of us have been trained to say, I need to fight my depression or fight my anxiety or get rid of my anger or my sadness. So step one is gratitude. Step two is, how is this serving me? How is this strategy serving me? How does my anger serve me? How does my anxiety help me? How has my depression helped me? So that's the second step. Third step, very simple. In what ways is it not serving me? Explore that for a while. And then the fourth one is, what do I really, really want? So to review those, it's start with gratitude for what we call strategies, and conscious recovery we call addiction or anything else that we're doing behaviorally as a brilliant strategy. Gratitude, in what ways is it serving me? In what ways is it not serving me? And what do I truly want? When I get down to the frequency of what I truly want, it's usually something like love and connection, to be seen, to be heard, to feel loved, to have meaningful relationships, to have passion for my work. So when we can get down and be in touch with that, spend some time with that. And then when you get to that place, see if you can set your timer for 5 minutes and just sit with the energy of what you really want in your life. And then we can start to explore, maybe it already exists within you. Maybe the conversation switches to, how can I offer this? Or how do I cultivate this? Or how do I let this radiate outward? I think this is a huge opportunity for all of us to slow down and get in touch with what truly matters.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, TJ. That's really, really beautiful. I can't wait for that third book. I want to thank everybody that's tuned in. Unfortunately, I can't tell who all is tuned in right now, but we love you all. Thank you for joining us. And the conversation with Dr. Adriana Popescu is next Tuesday. Is that right?
Tuesday at noon.
Tuesday at noon. Okay, cool.
Pacific time, yeah.
So we will we'll create an event for that on Facebook so everybody knows it's coming. And like I mentioned earlier, you guys, for free content, check out the podcast. We've got a lot of episodes that are really relevant to what's going on in the world right now that can serve as support for you during this time. And until next time, we hope that you're well and healthy. And if you need us, we're here to support you.